A man with Alzheimer's opens the gate for a stray pit bull, and the puppy's attitude, everyone speechless. Miguel lived each day following a routine that rarely. Every morning, he would wake up before sunrise, prepare coffee, and organize the house to welcome. Not because he was expecting visitors or enjoyed everything in perfect order, but because it was the only way he could bring some structure to his father Tomas's life. Tomas suffered from Alzheimer's, and every day was a new battle against forgetfulness. As the rich aroma of coffee filled the kitchen, Miguel would often stare out the window, drawing strength for the long day ahead. Moments later, Tomas's shuffling footsteps would echo through the corridor. He would appear with vacant eyes, lost in a time that no longer existed. Sometimes, Tomas would ask questions Miguel had answered dozens of times. "Miguel, where is your mother?" Tomas would ask in a trembling voice. Miguel would take a deep breath and patiently respond, "Dad, Mom is gone. It's been many years." But what was an old truth for Miguel was a fresh wound for Tomas, one that reopened every single day. The same questions, the same explanations, and the same heartache repeated like an unending cycle. Miguel tried to remain calm, but the weight of fatigue, both physical and emotional, often felt unbearable. He loved his father deeply, but the daily struggle of watching him fade little by little was exhausting. Tomas no longer recognized the photos on the walls or the stories they told. The house, once full of vibrant life, now felt faded, much like Thomas himself. Sometimes, Thomas would hold an old picture of Miguel as a child and ask, "Who is this little boy?" Miguel would smile softly, hiding his sadness, and reply, "It's me, Daddy." For a brief moment, Thomas would frown, trying to connect the dots in his scattered memories, only to drift away into confusion again. But there were fleeting moments of clarity, priceless little windows into the past, when Thomas would recall stories from his childhood or share memories of Miguel as a boy. "Have we fed the dog today?" Tomas would sometimes ask, even though there hadn't been a dog in the house for years. Miguel faced every moment with unwavering patience and love, even as exhaustion crept in. He knew it wasn't his father causing the pain, it was the cruel grip of Alzheimer's, slowly stealing away pieces of the man he loved. Still, Miguel carried on. He prepared meals, helped Thomas get dressed, and accompanied him on short walks, cherishing every fleeting moment of connection amidst the fog of forgetfulness. But one day, everything changed when Thomas opened the gate for an unexpected visitor, a stray pit bull pup. A man with Alzheimer's opens the gate for a stray pit bull, and the puppy's attitude leaves everyone speechless. Miguel had left the house with careful instructions. "Don't open the gate, okay, Dad? Stay inside. I'll be back soon." Tomas had nodded, but Miguel knew that his father's memory was fragile, like a glass on the edge of a table, always at risk of shattering. Left alone, Tomas wandered the house with slow, uncertain steps. The wooden floor creaked beneath his feet, each sound echoing in the stillness. His eyes drifted toward the rusty gate at the end of the garden path. Something about it felt off. A sound, a sensation. He couldn't quite place it. Drawn by an invisible pull, Thomas made his way toward the gate. His trembling fingers brushed against the cold, rusty lock. On the other side, he saw him, a dog. The animal stood still, its muscular body covered in white fur with scattered brown patches. Its amber eyes locked onto Thomas, unblinking and deep, as if they could see past the confusion clouding Thomas's mind. For a long moment, neither moved. The breeze whispered through the leaves above them, carrying with it a strange sense of calm. Thomas should have been afraid. The dog was powerful, its strong posture suggesting it could pounce at any moment. But instead, Thomas felt safe. "Who are you, boy?" Thomas murmured, his voice trembling but gentle. The dog tilted its head slightly, ears perking up as if it understood every word. Thomas hesitated, his mind clouded and unsure. He knew he shouldn't unlock the gate. Miguel had told him not to. But something about those amber eyes, about the dog's calm stillness, pushed him forward. Almost unconsciously, Thomas turned the lock. The metallic clink echoed sharply in the silence. The dog stepped cautiously through the open gate, its movements slow and deliberate, as if trying not to startle Thomas. They stood a few feet apart, staring at each other in silence. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something he couldn't name. "You look lost, just like me," he whispered. The dog slowly sat down, its tail resting calmly on the stone path. Its amber eyes never left Thomas, and in them Thomas felt an unexpected warmth, a connection he couldn't explain. For the first time in a long while, Thomas didn't feel alone. Thomas hesitated for a moment, his trembling hand stretched out toward the dog. The pit bull, strong yet calm, remained motionless. His amber eyes locked onto Thomas's with a strange sense of understanding. In that fleeting moment, something clicked, a connection Thomas couldn't explain. It felt as if the animal was there for a reason, a beacon in the fog of his scattered thoughts. Despite the confusion clouding his mind, Thomas felt a small spark of clarity. This was no ordinary encounter. Taking a slow step back, Thomas muttered softly, "Well, it looks like you're staying." He closed the gate behind the dog with a quiet click. The pit bull didn't move but sat there, watching Thomas with the same piercing gaze. What would happen next was uncertain, but Thomas had a deep, unshakable feeling that his life was about to change. That night was peaceful, like many before it. Thomas sat in his favorite armchair, an old photo album resting in his lap. His frail fingers traced the faded images, his lips murmuring names and stories that only he could hear. Lying beside him was the dog, whom Miguel had started calling Thor. The large white pit bull with brown spots rested calmly, his amber eyes alert, always observing. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of branches outside swaying in the night breeze. Miguel had not yet returned from work, leaving Tomas and Thor alone in the quiet home. Suddenly, Thor's head shot up. His ears perked, his muscular body tense. Something outside had caught his attention. With slow, deliberate steps, he began walking toward the door, his gaze fixed intently on the darkened yard beyond the window. Tomas, still lost in the haze of his memories, didn't notice at first, but Thor's growl, a low, deep sound, broke through his wandering thoughts. "What is it, boy? Did you see something?" Tomas asked, his voice trembling. Thor didn't respond, of course, but his growl deepened, reverberating through the small living room like a warning bell. Then Tomas heard it, a faint noise outside, the sound of feet on gravel, and the clink of metal. His breath caught in his throat as he shuffled over to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. Two dark silhouettes crept across the yard, their movements quick and deliberate. The metallic glint of tools in their hands caught the faint moonlight. Thomas froze. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing, and panic clawed at the edges of his consciousness. But Thor didn't hesitate. With a deep, ferocious growl, the dog moved swiftly toward the door, his heavy paws thudding against the wooden floor. His growl grew louder, sharper, a clear warning to anyone outside. The intruders hesitated, clearly startled by the sound of the powerful dog. One of them moved closer to the gate, gripping a crowbar in his hand. He jabbed it toward Thor through the narrow bars of the gate, trying to intimidate him. But Thor wasn't intimidated. He bared his teeth, his growl turning into a snarl as he lunged at the gate. His strength and determination were undeniable, and the intruders realized they had miscalculated. With a sudden crash, the gate gave way. The metal hinges creaked and snapped, and Thor charged forward like a bolt of lightning. The first intruder barely had time to react before the pit bull was upon him, knocking him to the ground with a powerful leap. The man yelled, trying to shield himself with his crowbar. But Thor was relentless, his jaws locked onto the man's arm, holding firm and refusing to let go. The second intruder froze, panic flashing across his face as he saw his partner struggling under the weight of the powerful dog. Inside the house, Thomas stood frozen, his trembling hands gripping the curtain. His mind was a whirlpool of fear and confusion, But amidst the chaos, one thing was clear. Thor was protecting him. Thor's powerful jaws held the first intruder firmly in place, but the second man, seizing the moment, pulled a sharp object from his backpack and advanced towards Tomas. The elderly man stood frozen near the door, his wide eyes filled with fear. But Thor sensed the danger. In an instant, he released the first man and lunged at the second intruder with incredible force. The impact was so strong that the man was thrown to the ground, his weapon clattering out of his hand. Thor stood over him, teeth bared, snarling with an intensity that sent shivers down the intruder's spine as he desperately tried to crawl backward. At that very moment, the front door burst open. Miguel had arrived. He froze in the doorway, taking in the chaotic scene before him, his father trembling and leaning against the wall, two intruders sprawled on the ground, and Thor standing firm like a soldier, keeping both men in check. "Daddy, everything is fine," Miguel said as he rushed to Tomas's side, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. In the days that followed, Thor became an inseparable part of Miguel and Tomas's daily lives. His presence felt natural, as if he had always been there. Every morning, while Miguel prepared breakfast, Thor would follow Tomas as he wandered through the garden, staying close and alert, watching every step Tomas took. Tomas seemed different, more engaged, more alive. He began speaking to Thor often, sharing fragments of stories from his past, details about his childhood, and memories of people long gone. Thor would sit patiently beside him, his amber eyes fixed on Tomas as if he understood every word. Occasionally, he would tilt his head in that endearing way dogs do, and Tomas would laugh softly, a sound that had become rare in recent years. One particular day proved to Miguel just how special Thor truly was. Tomas, caught in one of his moments of confusion, walked toward the garden gate, fumbling with the latch. It was something he had done many times before when lost in his memories. Miguel, washing dishes in the kitchen, noticed Tomas's actions from the window, but couldn't get there fast enough. Before Miguel could intervene, Thor was already there. He stood in front of the gate, his sturdy body blocking the path. He didn't bark or growl. He simply stood there, unmoving, his deep eyes locked on Tomas's face. "Why are you in the way, boy?" Tomas asked, chuckling softly, as if Thor was playing a game. Thor wagged his tail slightly but didn't budge. Every time Tomas tried to step to the side, Thor matched his movements, always staying between Tomas and the gate. After a few minutes, Tomas sighed and turned back toward the garden, mumbling something about flowers needing water. From the kitchen, Miguel exhaled deeply, relief washing over him. He knew he couldn't always be there to prevent such moments, but now he had Thor, a silent, watchful guardian. Thor's attentiveness wasn't limited to the garden. One afternoon, while Miguel was washing dishes, a faint burning smell began to fill the kitchen. Tomas had left a pan on the stove, the contents starting to smoke. Thor stood by the stove, staring intently at the pan. He barked, once, sharp and loud enough to grab Miguel's attention. Miguel rushed over and turned off the stove just in time, his heart racing. He turned to Thor, his voice full of gratitude. "Good boy, Thor. You're watching over us more than I could ever imagine." Miguel knelt and rubbed Thor's head affectionately, feeling an overwhelming sense of thankfulness for the dog's sharp instincts. As the days turned into weeks, the house began to feel different, warmer, livelier. Tomas, who once spent long hours sitting quietly and staring into space, now spent afternoons in the garden with Thor. He would throw an old ball for the dog to fetch, laughing each time Thor came bounding back with it in his mouth. Miguel noticed that even in the haze of Tomas's illness, there were more moments of clarity, more smiles, and less agitation. It was as if Thor's presence had brought a sense of calm to his father's troubled mind. At night, when the house grew quiet, Thor would lie down near the sofa where Tomas slept. He didn't move much, his ears twitching occasionally at distant sounds, his eyes half closed, yet alert. It was as if he knew his role: to protect, to guard, to be there. Miguel would often watch this scene from the doorway, his chest tight with emotion. Taking care of Tomas was a responsibility Miguel had accepted without hesitation, but it was a burden that could feel heavy at times. Yet, with Thor by their side, everything felt just a little bit lighter. Thor wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a companion, and in so many ways, a beacon of hope amidst the uncertainty of Alzheimer's. For Thomas, Thor was a friend, a listener who never interrupted, a companion who never judged, and a silent, steady presence who brought fleeting moments of clarity and peace. And for Miguel, Thor was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, help can arrive in the most unexpected forms, sometimes with four paws and a wagging tail. The house, once heavy with silence and shadows of fading memories, now carried a new rhythm, a quiet melody of companionship and warmth. Thor hadn't just become a part of the family, he had transformed it. One sunny morning, Miguel stood by the kitchen window, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands, watching the scene outside. In the garden, Tomas stood with a garden hose, carefully watering the flowers. Thor sat beside him, his head slightly tilted, watching Tomas with focused attention, as if supervising the task. "Did you see, Thor? These flowers need water, but not too much. Otherwise, we'll drown them," Tomas said in a gentle tone, his voice carrying a lightness Miguel hadn't heard in years. Thor didn't respond, of course, but his ears twitched at Tomas's words, and his tail wagged softly. Tomas chuckled, a sound so tender and genuine it brought a tear to Miguel's eye. Miguel leaned against the counter, smiling unconsciously. It was remarkable how his father's demeanor changed when he was with Thor. Alzheimer's had robbed Thomas of so much, his independence, his clarity, even fragments of his identity. But in these moments, it felt like pieces of him were being gently returned. Later that afternoon, Miguel joined them in the garden. He sat on an old wooden bench and watched as his father tossed a worn-out rubber ball across the yard. "Go on, boy," Tomas said with a joyful laugh. Thor bolted after the ball, his tail wagging furiously as he retrieved it and dropped it back at Tomas's feet. The cycle repeated, and each throw seemed to peel back another layer of the fog in Tomas's mind. Miguel couldn't take his eyes off his father. For the first time in so long, Tomas seemed truly present. His laughter was unguarded, his movements were steady, and his words, though sometimes broken, carried clarity. In those fleeting moments, Miguel realized something profound. Thor wasn't just a dog, he was a bridge connecting Tomas to memories, to moments, to feelings that Alzheimer's had tried to bury. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the living room, Miguel sat at the table reviewing some paperwork. Thomas was dozing peacefully on the couch, and Thor was curled up at his feet, his head resting on his paws. In his sleep, Thomas's hand drifted down and found Thor's fur. His fingers moved gently, absent-mindedly stroking the dog's back. It was a small, instinctive gesture, but Miguel felt the weight of its significance. Thor remained still, his amber eyes partially open, watching Tomas with an expression that Miguel could only describe as understanding. Miguel set down his papers, his throat tight with emotion. That silent connection between his father and Thor was something he could never replicate, no matter how. It was a small, instinctive gesture, but Miguel felt the weight of its significance. Thor remained still, his amber eyes partially open, watching Tomas with an expression that Miguel could only describe as understanding. Miguel set down his papers, his throat tight with emotion. That silent connection between his father and Thor was something he could never replicate, no matter how deeply he loved his father. In the following days, Miguel noticed other changes. Tomas seemed calmer, less agitated. The episodes of confusion were still there, but their edges seemed softer, their weight less suffocating. Thor had become more than a companion. He was Tomas's anchor to reality, a gentle reminder that he was safe, loved, and not alone. One evening, as Miguel was locking up the house for the night, he looked over at the sofa. Tomas was already asleep, and Thor lay beside him, his large stretched out, his head resting protectively near Tomas's feet. Miguel whispered softly into the quiet night, "Thank you, Thor. You've given us more than I ever thought possible." Thor's ears twitched slightly, but he didn't move. He simply stayed there, loyal, steadfast, and quietly watching over the man who had once opened the gate to let him in. The sun cast a warm golden glow over the garden as Miguel stood frozen at the doorway, watching his father recite a poem he hadn't heard in years. "Life is a dream, and dreams are—" Tomas's voice carried a clarity and strength that felt almost miraculous. Thor lay beside him, his amber eyes fixed on Tomas, his tail wagging slowly as if he understood the significance of the moment. When Tomas finished, he looked down at Thor with a soft smile. "Did you like it, boy? I've always used this poem to reference that nothing in life is permanent, but everything is precious." Miguel felt tears well up in his eyes. For a brief moment, it was as if time had reversed, and his father was once again the teacher he had always admired, a man full of wisdom, passion, and kindness. The bond between Tomas and Thor was undeniable. It was as if Thor's presence had unlocked something deep within Tomas, a bridge to memories that Alzheimer's had tried to bury. Miguel walked over and gently placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad, that was beautiful." Tomas looked up at his son, his eyes clear for just a fleeting second. "Miguel, poetry isn't just words. It's a way to hold on to moments." Miguel nodded, unable to speak. Thor, sensing the weight of the moment. Miguel sat on the balcony, tea in hand, as the soft glow of the moon. The night felt different, calm, peaceful, full of quiet assurance. He watched as Tomas, his father, rested in the armchair, his breathing steady, while Thor lay beside him, alert yet serene. The dog's presence was constant, even in his moments of rest, as if he understood the importance of watching over Tomas, always ensuring he was safe, cared for, and never truly alone. It was moments like this that filled Miguel with a deep sense of gratitude. The house, which had once been filled with an unsettling silence and the heavy weight of uncertainty, now echoed with life. The laughter, the simple exchanges, the way Tomas had come back to life in small but meaningful ways. These were gifts Thor had brought with him, unseen and unspoken, but powerful nonetheless. "You're not just a dog, are you, Thor?" Miguel whispered to himself, a sob on his lips. "You've brought us back to ourselves." It was more than the protection, more than the companionship. It was the way Thor had become a bridge between the man Tomas had been and the man he still could be. The bond between father and dog was inexplicable, yet undeniable. Each day, it became clearer that Thor was not just helping Tomas through his illness, but giving Miguel something more valuable than he had realized, a renewed sense of hope. Miguel glanced back at his father, who was still dozing in the chair, a faint smile on his lips, as if content in the presence of his loyal companion. The house felt warmer now, filled with a new rhythm, one that was no longer governed by the silent struggles of Alzheimer's, but by the quiet strength of a dog who had, in his own way, become a family member. As Tomas slept, Thor's eyes remained open, scanning the surroundings. Even in rest, the dog's vigilance was unwavering, as only animals can, that his purpose here went beyond just being a pet. He was Tomas's protector, Miguel's helper, and the silent force that had brought both of them back to a semblance of peace. Miguel set his cup down and stood up, walking softly toward the door to the living room. He paused before entering, taking a moment to watch the scene before him. Tomas, sleeping soundly, with Thor resting just beside him, both of them at peace. For the first time in a long while, Miguel felt a sense of certainty. Despite the challenges that lay ahead, despite the uncertainty that Alzheimer's brought, he knew one thing for sure: they weren't alone. Thor had shown them that no matter how dark the road might seem, there would always be someone watching, someone who cared. And sometimes, that was enough to remind them that they could still find joy, purpose, and meaning, even in the face of hardship. As the night and the gentle breeze rustled through the trees outside, Miguel felt the weight of the day lift from his shoulders. He smiled softly as he turned away, knowing that tomorrow, just like today, they would all be together. And with Thor by their side, there was a chance that even the hardest moments could be faced with hope. Miguel let out a deep sigh as he reflected on everything that had changed since Thor had appeared in their lives. That dog, once a stranger, had now become an essential part of their family. He remembered the night when the thieves had broken in, and how Thor had fiercely protected his father, Tomas, and the house. But looking at Thor now, Miguel realized that the dog had done far more than that. Tomas, who had once lived lost in his own mind, now had a reason to get up every day. He smiled more, talked more, and seemed more present, even if his memory still failed him. The walks in the garden, the moments of play with Thor, and even had changed. With Thor by his side, Tomas was no longer alone in his journey. Miguel couldn't help but smile as he thought of all the times Thor had blocked the gate, keeping Tomas safe, or warned him when something wasn't right. "You're not just smart, Thor. You're wise," Miguel whispered, as if the dog could hear him. Thor lifted his head slightly, giving Miguel a look before settling back into his rest, as if saying, "I'm here, you can trust me." Looking at his father and Thor together, Miguel noticed something he hadn't before. It wasn't just Tomas who had changed. He himself was a different person now. The weight he carried, the guilt for not being able to do more, the feeling of being alone in this journey, everything seemed lighter. Thor had brought something to Miguel that he didn't even know he needed, a partner in the mission of taking care of Tomas, a friend who reminded him that even in the most difficult situations, there was all. As Miguel finished his tea, he pulled out the diary where he recorded important moments and thoughts. He turned to the last page, still blank, and wrote down something that had been on his mind for days. Thor wasn't just a guardian, he saved us from ourselves. Closing the diary, Miguel looked at Thor once more. The dog lay with his eyes closed, breathing calmly but still alert. Miguel felt a wave of gratitude. He didn't know how much more time he would have with his father or with Thor, but he knew that as long as they were together, their house would be a true home. That night, as Miguel went to bed, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he felt certain that despite the difficulties, everything would be all right. And deep down, he knew that this certainty came from the amber and faithful gaze of a dog who had arrived when they needed him most. This is our story with Thor, a dog who not only protected our home, but brought hope, joy, and purpose back into our lives. Now I want to know, have you ever experienced something like this? Has an animal ever transformed your life in an unexpected way? Share your story in the comments below. I love reading and chatting with you. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like. It helps a lot and means more people can learn about stories like ours. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are many more exciting and inspiring stories to come. Thor showed us that even in the most difficult times, there can be light. Thanks for watching, and until next time, subscribe, comment, and share.